5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Radioflash, Armada's dedicated defence and security electromagnetic podcast with your host, Tom Withington at the controls. Now, by the time this podcast is released, the United States will have a new president and Congress. Whatever the political hues of the new congressional and Oval Office incumbents, the importance of the electromagnetic spectrum to America's strength, security and prosperity will not diminish. The defence and security electromagnetic agenda for the new Congress and executive is considerable. But what are the priorities? How secure are the budgets? And are US politicians becoming more spectrum aware? Well, to discuss these issues and more, I'm delighted to be joined by Ken Miller, Director of Advocacy and Outreach for the Association of Old Crows International Electronic Warfare Advocacy Organization. And he joins us today from Pennsylvania. Ken, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Tom, it's great to be here with you and have the tables turned. So thank you.
Well, as you might have guessed from Ken's response there, Ken and I are indeed old friends. And Ken is a fellow podcaster, and he is a host of the From the Crow's Nest podcast, which you can actually find anywhere you get your podcasts. And I would highly recommend a listen. I think have I got this right, Ken? It's every week that you're podcasting now.
Yeah, we do episodes every week. 2 of those episodes are for AOC members only or subscribers, and they're more discussion-oriented podcasts, whereas the regular ones are available to everyone, and it's more of a technology policy topic podcast.
Well, we'll be talking a little bit more about the benefits of AOC membership later, as both you and I are fellow Crows. And I'm aware that in the past, you and I have spoken on your podcast. Yep. You've been very kind to have me on as a guest a couple of times. And one of the things we've talked about is obviously I suppose what you would call the intersection between what we look at from kind of the military, the procurement level, the operational level, and obviously the political questions at the end of the day, because it's the politicians that ultimately buy the stuff. As I mentioned in the intro, we've got elections going on in the US at the moment, but as things stand at present, on your side of the pond, what are the main issues affecting the US EW community, and I suppose the EW enterprise more generally?
The U.S. Congress has the power of the purse. So a lot of the decisions, the funding, everything comes out of the decisions of Congress. So they have a huge role in where we're going from a DoD perspective. As it pertains to EW, obviously, what I like to call the democratization of EW is continuing to be a focus. How do you get the EW capabilities down to the warfighter on the ground? The decision-making, help them understand the situational awareness. So as data is just ubiquitous, how do you collect that, analyze that, and help the warfighter make that decision? Obviously, UAVs are playing a huge importance. How do you get that capability on a UAV? How can you make unmanned systems cheaper, accrue that mass that you need for those? And then I think the other 2 quick areas are, the integration of EW capabilities earlier in development in multifunction systems, because you're no longer having that single EW box. These are multifunction systems. A lot of different capabilities are on there. You have to get those out to the field. And then I think the final thing is leadership, and that's been a problem for decades, but it's getting better, up and down.
From your perspective, at present, how is the sort of EW spending prioritization faring as regards other equally important defense priorities?
There's a tremendous pressures to continue to increase that out of necessity. It's insufficient to fund all the priorities out there, in part because you're witnessing kind of a transition into how we're going to be fighting in the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so there's pressure to innovate, get those systems out faster. Of course, that puts pressure on, just the bureaucracy of DoD as well. Those organizational changes take time, money. And then I think you also have, the frequency of the increase of conflict around the world, the pressures of supplying our partners and allies. And then also, I think just generally speaking, you have a lot more pressure to, some of your fifth gen, next gen systems are just getting so exorbitantly expensive. So you have all these pressures coming into the budget. For an EW perspective, our challenge is, and this touches Congress really importantly, it's still really deep down in the weeds and dispersed through numerous programs. So it's really hard to get a handle on the EW budget in the U.S. And this is a big problem for Congress as they're trying to make sure that we're funding the right technologies, capabilities. Trying to find out where that funding is a huge challenge. I think it's something that in the next year you're going to see reform efforts, acquisition reform efforts, and efforts to reform what we call the PPBE process, which is programming, planning, budgeting, and execution. And it's kind of the overall process that identifies what we're going to be spending money on. That organization or that process needs reformed. It's legacy thinking. It doesn't get us to where we need to. So we're going to see some of that reform, and that could change how we approach the defense budget overall.
One of the challenges we have is inculcating in the political minds of people on all sides of the aisle what the spectrum is and why it's important to our defence and security. And I wondered, from your perspective, to what extent do you feel that the US political community gets it, that they're spectrum aware, I suppose, is the term?
From a DoD leadership, I think they get it. The challenge is that flow down from the leadership down through the process. There's so many points where the known understanding of EW can kind of break apart into areas where the people are making decisions that don't understand it. But you listen to the leaders, whether they're combatant commanders. I was just down in Robins Air Force Base, Georgia this week for an activation ceremony out of the U.S. Air Force's 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing. You listen to Air Force leadership, they get it. And now they're trying to change that organization, move that ball down the court. There's just a lot of obstacles in the way to doing that. But there's efforts, it's just not always as clean and quick as you'd like to see it. In Congress, huge problem. Yes, there's a few members that understand it. I think, AOC, we've done a number of education initiatives there's a congressional EW working group on Capitol Hill, led by 4 members of Congress. They get it. And their challenge is to educate their fellow members. And every year it's like, hey, can you give us a compilation of EW budgeting and plans and programs so that we can look at? Nobody can provide that for them. We're not good at that next step to actually make enduring reform.
Do you think that the ongoing war in Ukraine, the situation we've got in the Middle East and the conflict there, obviously tensions with China are not diminishing, is that having an impact on this political EW awareness in Washington, do you feel?
Looking at the war in Ukraine, especially over the last 2 years, going on 3 years probably now, I think the leaders understand that this is a battle in the electromagnetic spectrum. They don't know how to solve every problem yet, obviously. There are different views about how we continue or help bring that conflict to an end, politically speaking. We'll know a little bit more about what direction the Congress and the president are going to go, at some point here, hopefully soon. But they do understand it. But this is one of the challenges. And if you follow U.S. military big organizational plans, you hear a lot. Well, we have to prepare for. They talk great power competition. You think 2 great powers, Russia, China. But there's also the asymmetric element. There's also the proxy war element. And so you're no longer, I don't think you're talking about so much competition as much as comprehensive conflict. I've read some articles in Foreign Affairs magazine talking about the future war, and that concept came up, this idea of comprehensive conflict. It's just everywhere all the time. And that's going to put a lot of strain on our leaders. They need to know about the importance of the spectrum because it's going to play the leading role in each of these conflicts.
And if you'd like to learn more about the vital work that the Old Crows performed, you can visit their website at www.crows.org. And you can also join the organisation on that webpage, which is something that both Ken and I, as Crows ourselves, would heartily recommend. But for now, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. But don't forget there's more defence and security news and analysis at www.armadainternational.com. That's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for listening.